I know with many other instruments too, what the composer writes in the score and parts may not correspond fully to what needs to be done.
Yes.
You realize that. The composer may not understand the proper doublings. There can be things about what kind of stick you want to get a particular effect that only a musician would know. So there's a lot going on, and I would add to the things you might learn sitting in the middle of an orchestra playing a Mahler symphony is the noise level.
Oh, absolutely.
The assault on your ears, the possibly dangerous assault on your ears.
I myself has lost a small bit of hearing, not substantial, in one ear from my years of playing. And it sort of comes with the territory. Many musicians have found earplugs that have worked for them that they can continue to play and still be isolated from the...
Or you might put in those colorless dividers. What are they called?
Sound shields.
Sound shields to protect, let's say, the backstand violas and cellos from the brass. You do that.
Yeah.
But since you mentioned your own career as a musician, what did you play and where did you play it?
Well, I am still a bassist. I am a member, have been since 1991, of what is now the Colorado Springs Philharmonic Orchestra, previously the Colorado Springs Symphony. I was... Prior to Colorado Springs, I was for 10 years principal bassist with the Nashville Symphony Orchestra, and prior to that with the Tulsa Philharmonic Orchestra.
God, forgive me for using the past tense. Musicians just don't do that.
Don't?
No, the musicians rarely stop playing completely.
No,
and you don't stop at all.
No.
No. So I just assumed here you are doing this intense work as a negotiator. You must have decided to switch.
No.
But no, which is fabulous. So there is no doubt that you know whereof you speak. So this makes a perfect segue into something we very much want to talk about, which is the article you wrote on the education of orchestra musicians. And it is right here on the polyphonic.org website, the website you are on right now if you're watching this. And the title is...
Gee, all I ever wanted to do was just play my instrument.
Which is something so many of us in music feel, look, we're in it for the music, that's what we care about. But as I've had to tell my students at Juilliard sometimes, yes, you want to play your trumpet in a great performance of a Shostakovich symphony, and who's going to pay for that? There's a problem in having it paid for. What's going to happen to you? But you go way beyond that simple question in this article.
Well, I think with all of the best intentions, conservatories and music schools across this country try to prepare musicians for, at least back in earlier times when things weren't quite as turbulent, to give musicians the sort of academic foundations of music, which I, as an interested musician, find very valuable as far as history and further advanced analysis issues in music. But what I found lacking in my own training was some of the pragmatic things which teaches orchestra musicians survival tools in the professional symphony orchestra world. As a case in point, even though I have a music education degree, nobody taught me at my institution how to present an effective outreach program, because as part of my job I was required to do that. I learned that on my own. Nobody taught me in music school how to manage my musical health so that I could avoid overuse problems. Nobody taught me on how to deal with ongoing problems in the symphony orchestra workplace, with negotiations, with understanding the union, with learning how to be an advocate for the arts. And today's symphony musician, if they are to see their institution prosper, need to have all these skills and then some if they are to prosper as a musician and for their institutions to prosper, because we want the musicians involved. We want the musicians educated in how to get involved and how to advocate for themselves and their institution.
I have heard that when a musician gets a job at an orchestra and shows up for the first time to play, that they cannot necessarily count on the kind of orientation that you would have in a corporate job, let's say. Nobody may sit down with them and say, here's the health plan, here's who you see, and here's a copy of the contract, and here are some of the things that come up day by day.
Well, not only that, we, as AFM Symphonic Services Division, recommend to locals and committees that they orientate musicians not only for the day-to-day operations of the newly hired's first job, but they need to have a sense. A musician certainly going into a major orchestra or any orchestra needs to have a sense of history of that orchestra, of knowing not only musically where that orchestra has come from, but there was a day, for example, when the New York Philharmonic was paid $110 a week for 26 weeks. And, you know, these things didn't just happen. Those were long-fought battles that throughout our industry were had to be achieved. And we must be vigilant to maintain them.
And I think one of the questions that would come to my mind is that a musician who goes through music school and then starts working with an orchestra may not even know that these are questions that should be asked.
Yes.
Because it will not have come up in the course of their education. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, you have a situation, as we all know, there is the classical music crisis, there is less money for orchestras, and orchestras, as we were talking earlier, may say to the musicians, you need to take a pay cut because we're in a bad way. So how are the musicians supposed to know when that's really true and when it's just being said to them?
Well, one of our services with the American Federation of Musicians is we provide to our local unions a service of financial analysis of the finances of the symphony, so that when we go into negotiations, we know not only what is the true financial state of the orchestra, but through our further analysis and discussion, we'll find out if things are bad, why.
Which is invaluable. I think it would help, in addition to that, if a musician graduating from music school and being ready to take his or her place in the professional world knew, for example, the management structures of orchestras, the role of the board.
Absolutely.
And some basic stuff about, as a rule, what part of the budget of the income is derived from which source. I have many students who couldn't say there's earned and unearned income, just to start with something as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
So now, how do you feel this should be integrated into music education? Obviously, you feel this should be required, and I would support that 1,000%. But
yes.
How do you think that should work out in practice?
Well, there could easily be courses that talk about the symphony orchestra structure, for example, to talk about that you are having people, well-meaning people, coming from the community or community leaders who serve on the board of directors and who are responsible making decisions, yet they will need to be educated, and it's no bad reflection on them. It is simply that they come from a different area that in many cases management may not understand, and that they need to be educated on some things. And that goes on daily across the country, but there is no reason that in a coursework that professionals, visiting artists could come and lecture in these kinds of courses, so that when musicians, I find that too many cases when I encounter new musicians coming into orchestras, there's sort of a fantasy land expectation that all I'm going to do is play great music and I won't have to. And having lived through two orchestras that went bankrupt,